Ever think about like where your D&D character really comes from? Not just their, class or their race, but their history, their motivations, the things that make them really unique.
Oh, for sure. And speaking of unique, you wouldn't believe what happened in our last session. My half-orc barbarian, who I always kind of thought of as like smash first, ask questions later, ended up revealing this incredibly detailed backstory about being exiled from his tribe after trying to protect a sacred grove. It totally changed how the whole party interacted with him. And it even influenced the plot in some really unexpected ways. Like there was this one point where, well, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but let's just say that backstory really came back in a big way.
That's awesome. I love when those unexpected backstory moments happen. They can really turn the whole game on its head. And that kind of gets at the heart of what we're talking about today, right? The power of character backgrounds in D&D.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially with all the updates coming up in One D&D.
Right. We actually found this super interesting article on LitRPG Reads that explores some really cool background ideas. And it talks about how they're kind of evolving.
Yeah, it's a great article.
So today, we're going to deep dive into what makes these new backgrounds so interesting. And hopefully give you some inspiration for your next character, whether you're a seasoned player or just starting out.
Sounds good.
Okay, so first things first, let's talk about this shift in how backgrounds are being handled in One D&D. The article mentioned that in past editions, they were often kind of like labeled envelopes with static features.
Yeah, I get what they mean by that.
What did that practically mean for your character, like when you were actually playing?
Well, it meant that you basically picked a background, right? Like, I don't know, soldier or noble, and you got a few set skills, maybe a language, some starting gear, and then like this background feature that might come up every once in a while, but not really.
Yeah.
It was good for adding like a little bit of flavor,
Yeah.
but it wasn't always deeply tied to your character's abilities or like how you actually played the game.
Right, like it felt kind of tacked on sometimes. You'd have this whole elaborate backstory in your head,
Yeah.
but the actual mechanical benefits of your background didn't really reflect that.
Yeah, exactly. It was like sprinkles on a cupcake. It's nice to have, but it's not really essential to the cake itself.
Okay, I like that analogy. So the article goes on to describe the One D&D backgrounds as like fresh and potent, and it calls them bridges between character and campaign. That sounds like a pretty big departure.
It is. And I think the key is this idea of mechanical integration. Basically, your background isn't just a story anymore. It actually gives you tangible in-game abilities and bonuses that affect how you play, like right from the start.
Okay, I see. So what does that look like in practice?
So these new backgrounds, they provide starting feats. Think of those as like foundational talents. They also give you specific ability score increases that are tied to your history. And then proficiencies in things like skills, languages, and tools that directly impact what your character can do and how they interact with the world.
So it's like instead of just saying, oh, my character has a shady past because they were a criminal, you might actually start with a feat that makes you better at, like, picking locks or something.
Exactly. And that starting feat isn't just some, like, random bonus. It's thematically linked to your criminal background, making that history immediately relevant to the gameplay. It's not just something you wrote down on a character sheet weeks ago.
Right. And I'm guessing the ability score increases work in a similar way.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the fact that they're tied to your background reinforces the idea that your past experiences have actually shaped your inherent strengths.
That's cool. It really ties everything together, doesn't it? Makes it feel more cohesive.
It does, and I think it also opens up a lot of really cool role-playing opportunities because your background isn't just this static thing anymore. It's something that you can actually play with and explore.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. The article goes on to say that these backgrounds are becoming the beating heart of character development. So it's not just about those initial abilities you get. It's about how your background continues to influence your character's journey, right?
Absolutely. Because these backgrounds are so intertwined with your character's mechanics now, they naturally influence how you approach challenges, how you solve problems, how you interact with the world.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Like, let's say you have a character with a background that gives them proficiency in persuasion.
Yeah.
Those skills are going to come up more frequently because they're tied to their core identity. It's not just a random skill they picked up along the way. It's something that's deeply rooted in who they are.
Right. And that would, like, affect how they handle certain situations. Maybe they try to talk their way out of a fight instead of just charging in.
Exactly. Or Maybe they use their skills to gather information from an NPC or to strike a favorable bargain.
I see. So it's not just about what you can do, it's also about how you think and how you approach things.
Exactly. And that's what I think is so cool about these new backgrounds. They really encourage you to think about your character in a more holistic way.
Okay, so we've talked about how backgrounds are becoming more mechanically integrated in One D&D, but the article also talks a lot about customization, like how players can now tailor backstories more intuitively.
Right. It's not just about picking from a list of pre-made options anymore. You have a lot more freedom to create something truly unique.
How does the system facilitate that?
Well, I think the more defined framework of these new backgrounds actually makes customization easier. Because you know the core elements you're getting, you can then layer your own personal backstory on top of that in a way that feels much more organic.
So it's like you have this solid foundation to build on.
Yeah, exactly. And the system gives you the tools to really personalize that foundation, to make it your own.
Okay, so let's say I want to play a rogue. And I decide to go with the criminal background because it gives me that starting feat for picking locks and all that.
Right.
But I don't want to just be a generic criminal. I want to have a specific story for why my character became a criminal in the first place.
Exactly. And that's where your creativity comes in. Maybe they were an orphan street urchin who had to steal to survive. Or maybe they were a disillusioned noble who turned to a life of espionage. The possibilities are pretty much endless.
I see. So the background provides the framework, but I get to fill in the details.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so fun, You get to create a character that's truly your own.
Okay, this is all making a lot more sense now.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the mechanical benefits of these new backgrounds, and we've touched on customization. But what are some of the other key features that really make them stand out?
Well, skill proficiencies are still a core component, but I think they feel more significant now because they're part of this more comprehensive package.
Okay.
Like if you choose the Arcane Archivist background, it grants you proficiency in both history and arcana,
Right.
which immediately paints a picture of a character who's knowledgeable, scholarly, and those proficiencies are much more likely to come into play, when you're exploring ancient ruins or deciphering magical texts.
So it's not just about having the skills, it's about having the skills that make sense for your character and their background.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that makes the game more immersive, because your background is constantly informing your actions and your decisions.
Makes sense. And language proficiencies, which I feel like can sometimes be overlooked, seem like they could have a much bigger impact now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, imagine your street-born smuggler suddenly understanding like the coded language being spoken by a group of shady figures in a tavern, or your court diplomat being able to smoothly converse with a foreign dignitary in their native tongue. These language proficiencies can unlock crucial information, they can build trust with key NPCs, they allow you to navigate social situations with a level of nuance that you didn't always have before.
Right, right. They add a whole other dimension to the game.
They do, they do. And then there's tool proficiencies, which I think are really cool.
Yeah, the article mentions things like tinkering or brewing. How do those tie into a character's background?
Well, they add a layer of practicality and creative problem solving, like if you choose the inventive tinkerer background and you gain proficiency with tinker's tools, you're not just someone who says they can build things, you actually have the mechanical foundation to attempt it.
Oh, I see. So it's like you can actually use those skills in the game to, I don't know, repair broken equipment or build traps or something.
Exactly. Exactly. And that can lead to all sorts of really interesting scenarios.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. But the article mentions that there are 15-plus key elements to think about when choosing a background. That sounds like a lot.
It can be a bit overwhelming, yeah. But I think the most important thing is to choose a background that feels right for your character. And that works well with the campaign you're playing in.
Okay, that makes sense. Are there any other key elements that our listeners should keep in mind?
Sure. One is to make sure that your background aligns with your chosen class and your character's role in the party. Like if you're playing a paladin, a background that emphasizes justice and righteousness would make a lot of sense.
Right, right.
Another thing to consider is compatibility with the overall campaign theme. Like if you're playing in a dark, gritty setting, a background that's all about high society and courtly intrigue might not be the best fit.
Yeah, I can see that. Anything else?
Well, I think it's also important to choose a background that has some scope for narrative depth, something that can be developed and explored over the course of the campaign.
Okay, so you're saying that I should choose a background that has some unanswered questions, some mysteries to unravel, some potential for growth and change.
Exactly. You want a background that can evolve along with your character.
Okay, this is all really helpful stuff. Now let's move on to the actual customization process.
Jay.
The article stresses that these new backgrounds aren't meant to be rigid templates, but rather a springboard for creativity.
Yeah, definitely. The backgrounds provide a solid framework, but they're also very flexible. If none of the existing options quite fit what you have in mind, you can absolutely work with your DM to modify an existing background or even create a completely new one from scratch.
Oh, wow. So it's really open-ended.
It is. It is. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about One D&D. It's really encouraging players to be creative and to come up with characters that are truly unique and memorable.
Okay, so let's talk about some specific customization tips.
Mm.
The article mentions aligning your background with your character's personal goals and aspirations.
Right. So if your character has a burning ambition to discover a lost magical artifact or a deep-seated desire to avenge a past injustice, you can work with your DM to craft a background that reflects those motivations.
I see. So, like, my background might give me specific skills or contacts that would be helpful in achieving those goals.
Exactly. And that makes the game more engaging, because you're not just going through the motions, you're actively working towards something that's meaningful to your character.
Right, right. That makes a lot of sense. And the article also talks about incorporating personal narratives into your background.
Yeah, like significant childhood events, formative relationships, things like that.
Right. How do those kinds of elements enrich a character's story?
Well, they provide depth and complexity. They give your character a past, a history, a reason for being who they are,
Yeah.
and that makes them more relatable, more believable.
Hmm. And I guess those personal narratives could also provide some interesting hooks for the DM to work with.
Oh, absolutely. A childhood tragedy could explain a character's current fears or prejudices. A missing mentor could serve as a source of ongoing inspiration. These kinds of elements give both the player and the DM tangible threads to explore.
Okay, that's really cool. And I also really like the idea of thinking about like background-related events and encounters that could happen during the campaign.
Yeah, that's a great way to keep the past feeling relevant and alive. Maybe your runaway cultist unexpectedly encounters former members of their dark sect.
Ooh, yeah. Or maybe your exiled noble stumbles upon evidence that could lead to the restoration of their family's honor.
Exactly. And those kinds of events, they not only increase player engagement, they also contribute to a richer, more interwoven narrative for the whole group.
Right, right. It ties everything together in a really satisfying way.
Yeah. And it makes the world feel more alive. Like it has a history, like things happened before the characters arrived on the scene.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about customization in general, but the article also provides like 12 plus specific tips. Are there any that stand out to you as particularly useful?
Oh yeah, for sure. One that I really like is tying your background to a secret faction or an influential guild.
Ooh, that sounds intriguing.
It is. It instantly creates layers of intrigue. It gives your character built-in allies or potential enemies. Maybe they're a member of a thieves guild or a secret society dedicated to preserving ancient knowledge.
Right, right. That could lead to all sorts of interesting plot lines.
It could. And it also gives your character a sense of purpose, like they're part of something bigger than themselves.
Okay, what other tips do you want to mention?
Another one that I think is really cool is incorporating a personal quest or a long-standing vendetta.
Okay, so this is like a specific goal that my character is working towards, even if it's not directly related to the main campaign plot.
Exactly, exactly. It
Yeah.
could be something as simple as finding a lost family heirloom or as grand as overthrowing a corrupt ruler. But it gives your character a sense of direction, something to strive for.
I see, I see. Okay, and what was the last tip you wanted to highlight?
Oh, right. Um, Including a symbolic item with significant historical meaning. Maybe it's a family crest, a worn-out journal, a mysterious artifact.
Right.
But it represents your character's past in a tangible way. And it can offer opportunities for discovery, loss, even conflict throughout the campaign.
Right, right. Like maybe the item gets stolen or maybe it unlocks some hidden secret.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And that can really make the game feel more personal. Like the stakes are higher because it's not just about abstract goals or objectives. It's about something that's deeply meaningful to your character.
Okay, this is all fantastic stuff. But we also wanted to talk about some specific background ideas, right? The article gives us a rundown of 12 1D&D backgrounds and character ideas. Let's go through a few of those and kind of, riff on them a little bit, see what sparks our imaginations.
Sounds fun.
Okay, first up, we have the Arcane Archivist. What do we think about this one?
Oh, I love this background. It's perfect for players who are really into the lore and the history of the D&D world.
Right, right. And it suggests a character who's not just powerful, but also knowledgeable. Like they understand how magic works, where it comes from, all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And they probably have access to all sorts of rare books and scrolls, maybe even some dangerous artifacts.
Ooh, yeah. That could be really cool. And what kind of classes do you think would work well with this background?
Well, wizards, obviously, but also bards, maybe even some clerics, anyone who views magic as something to be studied and understood.
Okay, cool. Next up, we have the street-born smuggler. What kind of character do you envision for this background?
I'm seeing someone who's quick-witted, street-smart, and knows how to get things done. They probably have a network of contacts in the city's underbelly, and they're not afraid to bend the rules a little bit, to get what they want.
Right, right. And they're probably pretty good at talking their way out of trouble.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They got to be charismatic, got to be able to charm their way into or out of any situation.
So this is definitely a background for a more roguish type of character.
Yeah, rogues, rangers, maybe even bards. Anyone who's comfortable operating outside the law.
Okay, cool. Next on the list is the wandering monster hunter. This one feels very classic, doesn't it? Like the lone hero who travels the land, slaying beasts and protecting the innocent.
It does. And I think it's a background that can be really versatile. You could have a grizzled veteran who's been hunting monsters for years, or you could have a young, idealistic adventurer who's just starting out.
Right, right. And they could be motivated by a sense of duty, or maybe revenge, or even just the thrill of the hunt.
Exactly. And I think this background works well with a variety of classes. Fighters, rangers, paladins, even druids who feel a need to protect the balance of nature.
Okay, cool. Next up, we have the court diplomat. This one sounds very intrigue heavy.
It does. I'm imagining someone who's smooth-talking, manipulative, and always knows how to play the game. They're probably skilled in persuasion, deception, maybe even a little bit of magic.
Right, right. And they're probably very comfortable in social settings, like they know how to work a room, how to make deals, how to influence people.
Yeah, exactly. They're the kind of character who can talk their way into or out of anything.
So what classes do you think would work well with this background?
Well, bards, obviously.
Yeah.
But also rogues, sorcerers, maybe even warlocks. Anyone who's comfortable wielding power through words and influence.
Okay, cool. Next on the list is the haunted survivor. This one has a very spooky vibe to it, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. I'm imagining someone who's seen some things. They've had a brush with the supernatural. Maybe they survived a demonic attack or they witnessed some kind of otherworldly horror. And that experience has left them scarred, both physically and mentally.
Right, right. So they're probably a bit jaded, a bit world-weary, but they're also tough. They've faced their fears and they've come out the other side.
Exactly. And I think this background works really well with classes that have a darker edge, like warlocks, necromancers, maybe even some rogues.
Okay, next up is the runaway cultist. This one sounds really intriguing.
Oh, yeah. I love this one. It's full of potential for both role-playing and storytelling. Maybe they were forced into the cult as a child, or maybe they joined willingly but later became disillusioned, and now they're trying to escape, to leave that life behind.
Right, right. And they're probably carrying a lot of baggage with them. Guilt, shame, maybe even fear of retribution.
Exactly. And I think this background works well with classes that have a spiritual or religious bent, like clerics, paladins, maybe even monks.
Okay, cool. Let's see, what else do we have here? The inventive tinkerer. This one sounds perfect for players who like to build things and solve problems with their hands.
Oh, yeah. I can see this character being a real asset to any party. They're the one who can fix broken weapons, disable traps, maybe even build some crazy contraptions of their own.
Right, right. And they're probably always tinkering, always experimenting, always trying to improve things.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this background works well with classes like artificers, rogues, maybe even wizards who have a more practical approach to magic.
Okay, cool. Next on the list is the exiled noble. This one feels very Shakespearean, doesn't it? Like the fallen prince or princess who's seeking to reclaim their rightful place.
It does, yeah. And I think it's a background that can be played in a lot of different ways. You know, they could be bitter and vengeful, or they could be noble and forgiving. They could be seeking to reclaim their throne, or they could be content to live a simpler life.
Right, right. And I think this background works well with classes that have a strong sense of duty and honor, like paladins, fighters, maybe even rogues who are motivated by a desire for justice. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Next up is the Horizon Seeker. This one sounds perfect for players who love exploration and discovery.
Oh, yeah. I'm imagining someone who's restless, curious, and always eager to see what's over the next hill. They're probably skilled in survival, navigation, and maybe even a little bit of diplomacy.
Right, right. And they're probably driven by a thirst for knowledge or a desire to see new lands and meet new people.
Exactly. And I think this background works well with classes like rangers, druids, maybe even bards who are drawn to the wild and the unknown.
Okay, cool. Next on the list is the Shadow Guild Apprentice. This one sounds very sneaky and mysterious.
Oh, yeah. I love this one. It's perfect for players who enjoy intrigue and espionage. You know, maybe they were trained as an assassin, a spy, or a thief, and now they're either working for the guild or they're trying to escape its clutches.
Right, right. And they're probably skilled in stealth, deception, and maybe even a little bit of magic.
Exactly. And they probably have a network of contacts in the criminal underworld.
So this is definitely a background for a more shadowy type of
Oh.
character.
Yeah, rogues, monks, maybe even warlocks. Anyone who's comfortable operating in the shadows.
Okay, cool. Next up we have the Temple Orphan. This one sounds like it could go in a lot of different directions.
It does, yeah. You know, they could have been raised in a strict discipline environment, or they could have had a more free-spirited upbringing. They could be devoutly religious, or they could be skeptical of faith.
Right, right. And I think this background works well with classes that have a spiritual or philosophical bent, like
Right.
clerics, paladins, monks, even some wizards.
Yeah.
Okay, and last but not least, we have the Shipwrecked Sailor. This one has a very adventurous feel to it, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm imagining someone who's tough, resourceful, and knows how to survive against all odds. They've probably seen some crazy things out on the open sea, and they're not afraid of a little danger.
Right, right. And they're probably skilled in sailing, navigation, maybe even a little bit of combat.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this background works well with the classes like fighters, rangers, maybe even barbarians.
Okay, so we've gone through a whole bunch of backgrounds here, and I think we've seen that there's a lot of potential for creativity and customization.
Right.
But I think the most important takeaway is that your background should be more than just a label or a list of skills.
Yeah. It should be an integral part of your character's identity.
Exactly. And it should be something that you can use to really bring your character to life.
Absolutely. And I think the new One D&D backgrounds give players the tools to do just that.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question. Which of these backgrounds, or maybe a combination of their elements, speaks to you the most? And how could you see yourself taking that initial concept and evolving it throughout a long and engaging campaign?
Yeah, that's a great question. And while you're thinking about that, we highly recommend checking out LitRPG Reads for more great D&D content. A special shout out to Paul Bello, a fine fellow indeed, for all the thought-provoking articles.
We'd love to hear your thoughts too. So share your favorite character backgrounds, either ones you've played or encountered in your games, in the comments below. We're always looking for inspiration.
Until next time, happy gaming, everyone.